Kurt McFall was born on December 9th, 1966, in San Diego, California. Growing up in a suburban environment, he was known to be a bright and popular student at Clayton Valley High School. Friends described him as confident, energetic, and caring. He participated in extracurricular activities such as the school newspaper and yearbook clubs, and was passionate about subjects like math and science. Aside from academics, Kurt loved the outdoors and was an avid participant in recreational activities, including swimming and cliff climbing. His early interest in Dungeons and Dragons eventually led him to join the Society for Creative Anachronism, a group dedicated to reviving medieval customs. On Saturday, September 8, 1984, Kurt left his home in Concord, California, and drove across the Bay Bridge into San Francisco. He planned to spend the night with a friend and return home on Sunday evening. However, what transpired that night remains uncertain. According to accounts from those close to him, Kurt had grown increasingly involved in a world far removed from his upbringing. In addition to his participation in the SCA, he had become interested in the occult and had joined a group focused on pagan religion. A high school friend later revealed that Kurt had mentioned his involvement in a satanic cult that dabbled in black magic. The friend explained that Kurt felt trapped by the group and feared for his life if he tried to leave. 2 days after his disappearance, on Monday, September 10th, 1984, two birdwatchers exploring the rugged cliffs at Land's End in San Francisco Bay made a grim discovery. They found the bruised and half-naked body of Kurt McFall on a remote beach below the cliffs. His body was missing a shirt, shoes, and socks, and it displayed multiple traumatic injuries, along with severe blood loss. The physical condition of his body was puzzling. Despite the injuries, there were only minor abrasions noted on parts of his body, and there was no sign of substances in his system. Notably, empty beer bottles were scattered around his abandoned car. This car was found on a golf course overlooking the ocean, and investigators noted several other unusual details at the scene. His driver's license was discovered on the floor, and his car keys were left on the seat. Notably, the prized suit of armor he had purchased for his SCA activities was missing from the trunk. The San Francisco coroner determined that Kurt died from multiple traumatic injuries and severe blood loss. While the report suggested that his injuries were consistent with a fall from the cliff, it also noted that the precise cause of those injuries could not be conclusively established. Initially, investigators believed that the death was caused by a probable accidental fall from climbing the cliffs. However, the coroner himself later remarked that an intentional act was a plausible cause, even though there was insufficient evidence to file criminal charges. As a result, the death was officially classified as unknown and left the case unresolved. One of the most controversial aspects of the case involves Gabriel Carrillo, who used the Welsh name Caradoc in his role as a leader within a neo-pagan group. Carrillo was known to have befriended Kurt and allowed him to spend nights at his apartment. On the night of his death, Carrillo recounted that Kurt had gone swimming at Ocean Beach and later knocked on his door around 3 a.m., stating that he was returning to the beach. Carrillo suggested that Kurt may have taken too many risks that night and possibly slipped or was caught by an undertow. While Carrillo maintained that Kurt's death was an accident, Kurt's father and some of his friends remained suspicious of his account. Over the years, several theories have been put forward to explain Kurt McFall's mysterious death. The first theory is the simplest, that he sustained injuries as the result of an accidental fall. Given the treacherous nature of the cliffs at Land's End, it's entirely plausible that Kurt may have lost his footing while climbing or while trying to get into the water. Supporters of this theory point to the lack of trauma on his body supportive of a struggle. Another theory is that Kurt was pushed off the cliff, suggesting foul play. This perspective is largely influenced by the observations of his father, Tom McFall, who firmly believes that his son didn't die by accident. Tom argued that Kurt would have been more adept at handling the cliff terrain. However, what I think might be missing from this perspective is the fact that one should absolutely not be climbing cliffs at night, let alone on dark and stormy nights. Further, he found that the peculiar staging at the scene, such as the beer bottles around the car and the missing suit of armor, indicates deliberate tampering. And quick note, as I was editing the video for this, I realized I left out a key fact about the beer bottles. Kurt's friends and family confirmed that he wasn't a drinker. Now, I don't put a lot of weight in his dad saying that, but the fact that all his friends agreed as well is definitely important. A third explanation claims that the crime scene was altered after Kurt's death. According to discussions on various forums, some believe that local vagrants or opportunistic individuals might have come upon Kurt's abandoned car and tampered with the scene. They suggest that the beer bottles and other items may have been left by these individuals, rather than being part of a larger occult conspiracy. This theory attempts to reconcile the accidental fall scenario with the oddities found at the car, arguing that the scene might have been unintentionally changed by unrelated parties. Kurt's case captured public attention largely because it emerged during the height of the satanic panic of the 1980s. It was often presented in a sensationalist way, attempting to tie his death into broader popular narratives that were being pushed in the media at the time. In my opinion, the most likely explanation for Kurt McFall's tragic death is that it was simply an accident. The available evidence, including his autopsy showing no signs of substances, suggests that a fall from the precarious cliffs of Land's End was a misfortune rather than a deliberate act. While occult theories are tempting, the simplest explanation often proves true, and in this case, an accidental fall appears to be the most plausible scenario. Also, I note that Gabriel Carrillo was portrayed as a Satanist at the time, but having looked into it further, he was a Wiccan with an interest in ancient Celtic traditions. I found a whole bunch of unverified accounts online from people who claim to have known him as Caradoc. Every account I've read says that he was interested in white magic and doing good and positive things in the world. It sounds much less sinister when presented that way in my view, and I think media sensationalism and the satanic panic overlay had a lot to do with this mystery. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a reminder to hit that subscribe button and share this video with 2 people you know. Sharing my content is the best way you can help my channel, and it doesn't cost you a thing. Jerry and Rita Alter appeared to be a completely ordinary American couple who turned out to potentially have a very unusual side hustle. Jerry was a retired public school music teacher, and Rita was a speech pathologist. They had 2 kids who had already entered adulthood. All this is to say they were very much your normal middle-class American family, at least from the perspective of outsiders. In 1977, they left the hustle of New York for a quiet life in Cliff, New Mexico, where they built a ranch-style home on 20 acres of land. Rita found work as a speech therapist in the local public schools, while Jerry, a former band teacher and professional musician, settled into retirement. They were known by neighbors and colleagues as polite, educated, and unremarkable in their habits. Friends even described them as, quote, not exactly thrill seekers, underscoring how normal they seemed. Despite their modest income, the Alters managed to travel extensively. They vacationed during school breaks and ultimately visited more than 140 countries, documenting their journeys in photographs and even authoring a book about their travels. By the time of their deaths, Jerry in 2012 and Rita in 2017, the couple had amassed over $1 million in savings. But let's just say their net worth may have been slightly higher than that, to say the least. Nothing in their background hinted at criminal behavior. However, this unassuming pair would posthumously become central figures in one of the art world's most astonishing mysteries. On the morning of November 29th, 1985, the day after Thanksgiving, a daring art heist unfolded at the University of Arizona Museum of Art in Tucson. Shortly after the museum opened around 9 a.m., a man and a woman entered the building. The woman engaged a security guard in conversation on the ground floor, while the man slipped upstairs to the gallery. Within minutes, the man carefully sliced a painting out of its frame, rolled it up, and concealed it under a garment. In just 15 minutes from their arrival, the pair walked out of the museum with their stolen prize. The artwork they stole was Willem de Kooning's Woman Ochre, a valuable abstract expressionist painting. A witness later recalled seeing the thieves speed away in a red car, but at the time investigators found few other leads. No fingerprints, and there was no security camera footage in the museum. Also, as a somewhat humorous aside, the museum decided to use their insurance payout to invest in surveillance cameras. There's a saying out there about horses and barn doors that I think applies to this situation. Composite sketches based on eyewitness descriptions showed a middle-aged man with curly hair, glasses, and a thick mustache, and a woman wearing a scarf and large granny glasses. Despite these clues, the case went cold and the FBI added Woman Ochre to its art crime list. But years passed without a break in the mystery. And this wasn't some run-of-the-mill museum tier painting. This one was estimated to be worth up to $150 million in today's money. For over 3 decades, the fate of the painting remained unknown, and the audacious thieves and the priceless canvas had simply vanished. The mystery of the missing de Kooning took a dramatic turn in August 2017. After Rita Alter's death that summer, the Alters estate was liquidated by their sons. An antique and furniture dealer in Silver City, New Mexico, purchased the entire household contents for about $2,000. While clearing out the Alters' remote cliff home, store co-owner David Van Auker noticed an unusual large painting hanging behind the master bedroom door. The artwork was positioned so that it would be hidden whenever the door was fully open, and a homemade doorstop prevented the door from swinging wide and striking the canvas. The painting was dirty, cracked, and covered in dust and cobwebs, suggesting it had hung in that concealed spot, undisturbed, for many years. Van Auker and his partners brought the painting back to their shop, where artists and customers immediately remarked that it looked like an authentic de Kooning. Suspicious that it could be the long-lost Woman Ochre, Van Auker quickly contacted the museum in Arizona. In a stunning revelation, art experts and museum officials confirmed that the canvas was indeed the original Woman Ochre, stolen on that November day in 1985. The rediscovered masterpiece was promptly turned over to authorities and eventually returned to public display at the University of Arizona Museum of Art. With the painting found in Jerry and Rita Alter's possession, attention turned to whether this quiet couple could have been the thieves. Investigators and journalists soon unearthed several compelling clues. One key piece of evidence was a photograph taken at a family Thanksgiving gathering in Tucson on November 28, 1985, the day before the heist. In the photo, Jerry and Rita Alter are seen smiling at the dinner table with relatives, placing them in the same city as the museum one day before the robbery. According to some, the old composite sketches of the suspects, when compared in hindsight, bore a notable resemblance to Jerry and Rita's faces. And yeah, this is one of those moments where you have to look at the screen and check these two out and compare them to the police sketch. Personally, I think Rita Alter looks exactly like the sketch of the woman involved in the crime, but the sketch of the man doesn't resemble Jerry at all. That said, I suppose Jerry may have been wearing a fake mustache, and perhaps even a wig, but the man in the sketch appears to have a dark tan. Given that the picture you're looking at is from a day prior, this lowers the likelihood that this was Jerry. Also, I note that commercial spray tanning wasn't available at the time. Other coincidences also raised eyebrows. According to the altar's nephew, Ron Roseman, the couple had a habit of buying red cars. In fact, almost every car they owned was red. This detail bolstered the suspicion that the Alters could have been the elusive pair who fled in a red car. Moreover, the way Woman Ochre was hidden in their home indicated a desire to keep it secret. Van Auker noted that when he removed the painting from behind the door, its outline was visible on the wall, meaning it had hung there for a very long time. He later noted that he believed that it had been there since it was stolen. Indeed, the couple never displayed the painting openly to guests. Only the Alters' two pairs of eyes, exclusively, ever saw the treasure, as one of Jerry's own fictional stories would fittingly put it. One of the most startling clues came from Jerry Alter's own writing. In 2011, Jerry self-published a book of short stories titled The Cup and the Lip: Exotic Tales. In one story, Eye of the Jaguar, a grandmother and granddaughter team up to visit a local museum, distract a security guard, and steal the museum's prized jewel. Instead of selling this jewel, a 120-carat emerald, they hide it away behind a secret panel with the promise that only their eyes will ever see it. The thieves in the tale leave no evidence behind. The parallels to the Woman Ochre heist are unmistakable. The distraction of a guard, the prized object taken without a trace, and a secretive hiding spot only for the culprit's enjoyment. It appears Jerry may have memorialized the very crime he and his wife are suspected of committing. Despite these clues, there is no direct proof, such as fingerprints or eyewitness identification, conclusively tying the Alters to the theft. By the time Woman Ochre was recovered, Jerry and Rita were deceased, and thus they were never interrogated or charged. Their two adult children haven't provided any information that sheds light on how their parents came to possess the painting, and said they didn't even know it was there until 2017. And this, of course, makes a lot of sense since they sold the painting for $2,000, along with their parents' other antiques. Officially, the case remains unsolved, but virtually all evidence points toward Jerry and Rita Alter as the likely culprits who pulled off the legendary heist. The major question hanging over this case is obvious. If they did it, why did they do it at all? One theory, favored by their friends and family, is that the Alters might have acquired the painting through unconventional means, but not by theft. Ron Roseman, the Alters' nephew, wondered if his aunt and uncle could have bought the de Kooning on the black market, or unknowingly from the real thieves. He imagined a scenario where the couple were approached at an art show or gallery by someone offering the painting, and the Alters couldn't resist the bargain. And to be honest, this sounds to me like someone who can't accept the fact that his mild-mannered aunt and uncle may have pulled off a truly legendary art heist. Notably, they never attempted to sell the painting or profit from it, even though it was immensely valuable. This fact has led some experts to speculate that Jerry and Rita stole for the thrill or for the love of art, rather than for money. Adding to the intrigue, in 2023 and 2024, investigators began probing whether the Alters were involved in other art thefts. In the same year that Woman Ochre was stolen, 2 other paintings went missing from the Harwood Museum of Art in Taos, New Mexico, during a March 1985 burglary. The FBI has since joined the investigation into these unsolved thefts, suspecting Jerry and Rita Alter may have been responsible for those as well. If true, it would mean the Alters pulled off multiple art heists in 1985, perhaps using similar methods of distraction and stealth. This has led to conjecture that the couple's secret life as art thieves might have extended beyond the de Kooning case. However, no other stolen artworks have been definitively linked to them to date. And yeah, I can't be the only one who is a bit jealous of these two. They sound like they were a real ride or die couple, so to speak. The Kongamato, a legendary creature in African folklore, is a deep cut in the cryptozoological community. Often described as a large pterosaur-like creature, its name translates to breaker of boats in some local dialects, reflecting its reputation for being dangerous. The Kongamato's story is rooted in the cultural traditions of Zambia, Angola, and the Congo, where it is believed to haunt the rivers and swamps of remote regions. The earliest reports of the Kongamato come from the oral histories of the Konde, Lozi, and Bemba peoples of southern Africa. They describe the creature as bird-like but reptilian, with leathery wings spanning 4 to 7 feet, a sharp beak filled with teeth, and a distinctly red or black coloration. Locals insist it lives in swampy areas, such as the Bangwulu swamps in Zambia. According to the lore, encounters with the Kongamato are dangerous. It's said to attack canoes and fishermen, leading to its reputation as a malevolent force. One of the most significant aspects of the Kongamato legend is its uncanny resemblance to a pterosaur, a type of flying reptile believed to have gone extinct 66 million years ago. This connection has made the creature a popular subject in cryptozoological circles. Unlike mythical creatures like dragons, which blend imagination and symbolism, the Kongamato's description aligns closely with known prehistoric animals. This is important since the ancient oral histories of a variety of African peoples speak about the creature. These histories precede the discovery of the pterosaurs, which led to an initial flurry of legitimate scientific interest. In 1923, British explorer Frank H. Melland brought the Kongamato to Western attention. Melland published a book which recounted stories he heard while traveling through Zambia. Local people showed him sketches of a winged creature they feared, insisting it was a real animal. Melland noted that when shown pictures of pterosaurs, the villagers identified them as the Kongamato. This sparked interest among Western scientists, many of whom were captivated by the idea of a living fossil in Africa. Further reports emerged in the mid-20th century. In the 1950s, an engineer claimed he encountered a flying creature with a wingspan of 4 feet in northern Zambia. According to his account, it had no feathers and didn't resemble a bat, but a juvenile pterosaur. Despite its compelling narrative, scientists remain extremely skeptical of the Kongamato's existence. Many suggest its descriptions could stem from misidentified known animals. Large birds like the marabou stork, with its impressive wingspan and prehistoric appearance, are often proposed as candidates. Similarly, fruit bats, such as the hammer-headed bat, which has a distinctive silhouette, could account for nighttime sightings. And yes, this is one of those times where you really need to look at the screen if you're just watching. I can see how a quick glance at a hammer-headed bat may make an observer think they've encountered some sort of prehistoric monstrous entity. Researchers also point out that eyewitness reports are notoriously unreliable, often shaped by cultural beliefs and expectations. In areas where the Kongamato legend is well known, people encountering an unfamiliar animal may interpret it through the lens of local folklore. That is to say, if you're in Zambia and you're familiar with the local folklore, and you see something you can't identify, you may think, oh yeah, that was definitely a Kongamato. Heidi de Schepper was a 26-year-old Belgian mom from Merksem, a city near Antwerp, who vanished in 2010, but whose disappearance wasn't reported for 14 years. She had a turbulent early life, including a difficult childhood, and time spent in institutional care. At 18, Heidi cut off contact with her biological family and moved in with her much older boyfriend in the municipality of Balen. And trust me when I say it, this relationship is extremely weird and disturbing, but I'll get to that in a moment. By 2008, the couple were living together in Balen, along with their 3 young children, then ages 2, 3, and 7. Described as leading a very isolated life with few social contacts, Heidi largely kept to herself, and was not close with others beyond her immediate household. In mid-2010, Heidi DeShepper disappeared suddenly and without any warning. According to a friend, she vanished from one day to the next, along with all of her personal belongings. Her live-in boyfriend, who was also the father of her children and maybe her adoptive dad, later confirmed that Heidi went missing in 2010, but tellingly no one reported her missing at the time. Not a single family member, friend, or even her partner contacted police when she vanished. Her ex-boyfriend did inform a social services office that she had moved away so as not to draw government benefits checks in Heidi's name for their children, but that was it. As a result, the disappearance went entirely unnoticed by authorities for years. In fact, official records even gave the illusion that Heidi simply moved away. The last administrative trace of her was the collection of a provisional driver's license on the 6th of May, 2010. It's unclear if Heidi herself picked it up. That license was never upgraded to a permanent one, and her identity card expired in 2011 without renewal. By November 2010, someone had informed the local Balin government that Heidi was no longer living at her registered address. After a routine check by government officials, her name was removed from the population register. Administratively, it was as if Heidi DeShepper had moved away or ceased to exist in Belgium. This bureaucratic deletion meant Heidi's absence didn't raise alarms. It was only by chance, nearly 14 years later, that the truth came to light. In late 2023, a report from the school of one of her children alerted authorities that the mother had been inexplicably absent for a very long time. This triggered a belated missing person investigation. In January 2025, Belgian federal police finally issued a public appeal for information on Heidi DeShepper's disappearance. The case immediately gripped Belgium, with headlines asking how a young mother of 3 could vanish for 14 years without anyone noticing or reporting it. Police revealed that despite extensive inquiries over the past year, they had found no trace of Heidi, not in Belgium nor abroad. About 20 tips have come in since the case went public, mostly from people who knew Heidi in the past. But so far no breakthrough has been achieved. Scrutiny quickly centered on Heidi's boyfriend, not only because he was the last person to see her, but because of the unusual and unnatural nature of their relationship. This man had originally been Heidi's foster parent, some reports even say adoptive father, before their relationship turned romantic. After divorcing his then wife, who had been a mother figure to Heidi, he began a relationship with Heidi, who was by then a young adult. According to one source, he indicated, quote, "Heidi was once my foster daughter. After I divorced my wife, I started a relationship with Heidi. Heidi was already pregnant with our first child at the age of 19. This disturbing guardian-turned-boyfriend dynamic has prompted shock and outrage in the community and online. Many find it extremely difficult to give the ex-boyfriend the benefit of the doubt given this background. The boyfriend has consistently denied any involvement in her disappearance, insisting that Heidi left of her own accord. He claims their relationship had deteriorated in 2010 due to Heidi's drug problem. By his account, Heidi was struggling with an addiction to meth, which put a strain on their household. And let's just be clear here. This is by his account. And at present, there's no public records confirming she did have a substance use problem. This prompted him to issue an ultimatum. Choose between substances or the children. He says that after he confronted her and demanded she get help, events came to a head. In June 2010, right before the summer holidays, Heidi picked up the children from school and dropped them off with his parents, telling them only, "I'm gone." She took some clothes she needed and any cash that was in the house, and then vanished. The ex-boyfriend claims that he never spoke to her or saw her again. Given the extraordinary delay in discovering Heidi de Schepper's disappearance, the case has generated intense speculation in Belgium. Police have publicly acknowledged three broad scenarios and say they're not ruling anything out at this point. One theory is that Heidi left intentionally to escape her circumstances. Supporters of this idea point out that she took personal items and cash, suggesting a voluntary departure. It's conceivable she felt trapped by her addiction, her troubled relationship, or her isolated life, and decided to disappear to start over. Her former boyfriend leans toward this explanation, even speculating that she might be alive and well in another country, and has suggested she may have relocated to Spain. There are, however, serious doubts about Heidi having orchestrated a fresh start. She had no known income or outside support at the time, and crucially, she never again contacted her children. Friends say Heidi was a devoted mother and would never simply abandon her kids. That said, all reports suggest that these friends were more acquaintances than anything, and may not have had a great deal of insight into her inner working. Another possibility is that Heidi met with some form of tragic incident not caused by a third party. Perhaps overwhelmed by her substance problem and domestic struggles, she may have perished either accidentally or on purpose. If her body was never found, or was found in another country, she may have been registered as a Jane Doe and still undiscovered until this day. By far the most discussed theory, both in the media and on online forums like Reddit, is that Heidi was the victim of foul play. Given the disturbing circumstances of her life, many have zeroed in on the ex-boyfriend. The fact that he was in a position of trust and authority as her one-time foster father or even her adoptive dad, and then entered a relationship with her is deeply troubling. On top of that, his decision not to report her missing and the convenient way her absence was kept off the radar raised serious suspicions. It's been widely noted that he effectively had years to cover any evidence if he had harmed Heidi. Some commenters online have noted that the most dangerous time in a domestic violence situation is when the individual tries to leave the abusive partner. The ex-boyfriend may have fabricated a story about an ultimatum about her substance use during the 14-year gap, knowing the evidence would be stale by the time authorities investigated. It's notable that authorities took the step of detaining and interrogating him in January 2025 as part of the reactivated investigation. In my view, any of the theories put forth here could be accurate. It sounds like Heidi was kept as a virtual prisoner by her adoptive father turned boyfriend, and for obvious reasons I can see why she wanted to escape this situation. However, given that she likely wanted to escape, and given that domestic situations tend to reach their crescendo during these times, it's clear why the ex-boyfriend may have done it. That said, the possibility of an accidental overdose or even an intentional ending also can't be simply written off. Unfortunately, Heidi lived a life of abuse and neglect from the moment she was born, and the weight of the world may have simply crushed her. Anyway, I'm hoping to have an update on this case in the near future. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a reminder to hit that subscribe button and share this video with 2 people you know. Also, quick special shout out to new shout out tier YouTube member Yurev. The Manipogo is a legendary lake monster said to inhabit Lake Manitoba in, you guessed it, Manitoba, a hellishly cold province in central Canada. The creature's name was coined around 1960 by combining Manitoba with Ogopogo, referencing a similar serpent-like monster in British Columbia, Canada. In local lore, Manipogo is described as a long serpentine animal with several humps visible above the water and a head often likened to that of a horse or sheep. Indigenous communities had long told stories of giant water creatures in Lake Manitoba, and the legend was later adopted into the Manipogo folklore. The first documented sighting by a non-Indigenous person was in 1909, when Hudson's Bay Company fur trader Valentine McKay claimed he saw a massive creature in the lake. Reports continued over the following decades, and by 1960 the monster had gained enough notoriety that it gained its current name. Around the same time, reports from neighboring Lake Winnipeg described a similar creature nicknamed Winnepago. It was thought to likely be the same animal moving between these two connected lakes. In 1962, two fishermen snapped a photograph of a long, snake-like form in Lake Manitoba, which remains the only purported photo of the monster to date. And I would tell you to look at your screen right now, but I'm 95% sure that this is just a literal tree branch. So by all means, take a look at your screen if you're not actively watching, but don't say I didn't warn you. In 1997, a man claimed he shot a 50-foot lake creature and that authorities secretly hauled the carcass away, a sensational story never verified by officials. Personally, I have to wonder what sort of hand cannon this dude claimed to be carrying that could take down a 50-foot creature. I'm guessing he didn't think this story through before he went to the authorities with it, because that's the size of a whale, and you can't just start blasting and hope to take down a whale. Reports of unidentified humps in the water still surface occasionally. During 2011 floods, some locals thought they saw Manipogo, but they were likely spotting drifting logs. The legend is so popular that Lake Manitoba's west shore even has a Manipogo Provincial Park, and the community of St. Laurent hosts an annual Manipogo Festival each March. And yes, if you've been watching my content for a long time now, you'll recognize this pattern. A cryptid goes viral in a specific location, maybe incites a bit of terror for a time, and then becomes a beloved local mascot. Skeptics believe most sightings can be explained by misidentifications of ordinary things. Floating logs, windswept waves, or swimming animals such as otters or moose can create the illusion of a multi-humped lake creature. A moose swimming with its head and back above water might even be mistaken for a monster, and its grunts could sound like an eerie wail to someone on shore. Lake Manitoba is also home to sturgeon that can exceed 10 feet in length. An aging giant sturgeon surfacing could account for sightings of a long, dark shape moving in the water. Folklore has also shaped the Manipogo legend. The very idea of a lake monster in Manitoba may have been inspired by indigenous oral traditions about water serpents. These tales, passed down through generations, primed people to interpret unusual sights on the lake as the fabled creature. Searches by researchers have never uncovered any physical trace of an unknown giant animal in Lake Manitoba or Lake Winnipeg. The urban legend known as the White Death is a piece of contemporary internet folklore that has made its rounds on various social media platforms since the early 2000s. While the exact origin and author of this story remain unknown, it's commonly classified as a creepypasta or a short horror story shared online. However, like other creepypastas such as Slender Man, as time has passed, the original fictional nature of the narrative has been forgotten and it's entered the realm of urban legend. At its core, the White Death story revolves around an elusive, vengeful entity that allegedly appears to those who become aware of its existence. According to the narrative, once a person learns about the White Death, this supernatural being is said to stalk them relentlessly, with the sole purpose of erasing any knowledge of itself from the world. The legend claims that the entity does not simply end its victims, instead it tears them apart, removing all traces that they ever existed, including photographs or records. The victim, in essence, vanishes so completely that they become an absence rather than a memory. This concept, an entity that hunts you purely for the crime of knowing it, plays deeply into the psychological fear of forbidden knowledge and inescapable fate. The White Death is usually depicted as a girl or a woman with an unsettling appearance. In many versions of the tale, She's said to have pale skin and hollow eyes, giving her a ghostly or cadaverous look. While traditional urban legends often involve more tangible supernatural beings that reside in a specific location, the White Death can supposedly track victims anywhere in the world. The only prerequisite for attracting it is becoming aware of it, hearing the story or reading about it, thus turning the very act of knowing into a fatal vulnerability. This aspect of the legend has made it popular among internet readers who enjoy psychologically driven horror. The White Death's growing legend can be attributed to a number of interrelated factors. First, it plays on the fear of forbidden knowledge, the idea that simply knowing something can put you in mortal danger. This concept resonates with classic horror tropes, such as cursed objects or forbidden books, but relocates the threat to the digital age, where information is abundant and easily accessible. The inevitable nature of the creature is also a major factor that adds to the power of the legend. Unlike other ghost-related urban legends where the entity is tied to a specific location, you can't just simply leave a location and escape the White Death. The entity instead lives inside your head so long as you have knowledge of it. On the bright side, I'll solve this mystery for you right now. The White Death isn't real, and it can't hurt you. It's a cool and creepy modern internet urban legend, though, at least in my view. Pyramid power refers to the idea that pyramids, whether ancient structures like the Great Pyramid of Giza or modern replicas, have unique energy properties. These properties are thought to be capable of preserving, healing, and even enhancing human life. The fascination with pyramids dates back thousands of years. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 2560 BC during Egypt's 4th dynasty, has always been a source of wonder due to its scale, precision, and just general mystery. While ancient Egyptians likely constructed the pyramids as tombs for pharaohs and monuments to their gods, their purpose became a focal point for speculative theories over time. And just to put things in perspective for a minute here, when ancient Romans, Greeks, and Persians looked at the Great Pyramids, it was ancient history to them. The modern concept of pyramid power gained traction in the 20th century. Much of it is attributed to Antoine Bovis, a French hardware store owner in the 1930s. And not to throw shade on being a hardware store owner, but as far as an occult backstory goes, that's pretty weak. Bovis reportedly visited the Great Pyramid and noticed that dead animals found inside appeared mummified rather than decayed. He hypothesized that the pyramid's unique geometry created an environment conducive to preservation. Inspired by this observation, Bovis experimented with scale models of pyramids and claimed they could mummify organic matter, sharpen razor blades, and even improve health. The idea went viral in the 1970s through Patrick Flanagan, a New Age author and inventor. Flanagan's book, Pyramid Power: The Secret Energy of the Ancients, popularized the idea that pyramids harness a mysterious form of energy. He and others claim that pyramid energy was responsible for healing properties, increased spiritual awareness, and improved plant growth. Proponents of pyramid power suggest that pyramids generate an energy field due to their specific shape and proportions. Supporters argue that pyramid power arises from the pyramid's geometry, which supposedly focuses and amplifies universal energy or cosmic vibrations. This theory is grounded more in metaphysical beliefs than science, though New Age advocates generally suggest that the theory is supported by science and geometry. Advocates frequently compare pyramid energy to concepts like qi in Chinese medicine or prana in Indian philosophy, that is to say, vital forces believed to flow through all living things. Some proponents suggest that the pyramid acts as an antenna for these energies, channeling them into a concentrated area. Despite its popularity among enthusiasts, pyramid power lacks a clear, testable mechanism. The claims often rely on anecdotal evidence and subjective experiences rather than rigorous experimentation. The scientific community has been skeptical of pyramid power since its inception. Researchers have tested many of the claims, but have consistently failed to find evidence supporting the existence of a unique pyramid energy field. One of the earliest and most enduring claims is that pyramids preserve organic material. However, controlled experiments have shown no significant difference between items placed under pyramids and those in similar conditions outside pyramids. Factors like airflow, humidity, and temperature are more likely to explain the observed effects. In the 1970s, scientists tested the idea that pyramids could sharpen dull razor blades, a claim advocated for by some pyramid power proponents. Studies revealed that any perceived improvement in blade sharpness was subjective and likely due to psychological bias. The physical properties of the blades remained unchanged. Some enthusiasts claim that plants grow better under pyramids, but controlled experiments have produced mixed results. In most cases, differences in growth are attributed to environmental factors, not pyramid geometry. Pyramid power as a tool for healing and energy enhancement lacks empirical support. While meditation under a pyramid may feel more profound for some individuals, it's been hypothesized that this is likely due to the placebo effect. I note that pyramid power as a belief system appears to have faded substantially since its heyday in the 1970s. On March 14, 1998, 39-year-old Lenny Derrickson and his teenage son, Jared, were starting a typical day on their dairy farm in Strong City, Oklahoma. That morning around 9 a.m., a stranger drove up to their house in a white Ford pickup truck. Lenny stepped outside to speak with the unidentified man. The conversation appeared friendly, and according to Jared, his dad didn't seem alarmed at all. After a few minutes, Lenny came back inside and told his son that the visitor wanted to see one of his stud horses. Lenny planned to accompany the man to Elk City, Oklahoma, and then to Mobetti, Texas, to look at horses, and said he would return by that afternoon. He then left the farm with the stranger in the man's white 1994 Ford F-150 pickup truck, which reportedly had New Mexico plates and a distinctive yellow tag on the front. Jared watched his father drive off, never imagining it would be the last time he saw him. Later that morning, approximately 2 hours after Lenny left, a possible sighting occurred. A waitress at a diner just a few miles from the Derrickson farm claimed she saw Lenny having breakfast with an unknown man. She noted that the other man did most of the talking, while Lenny was just drinking coffee and listening quietly. This description matched the stranger from Lenny's farm. However, Lenny's family doubted the sighting's credibility. He had already eaten breakfast at home, and they insisted he wouldn't eat breakfast twice in one morning. That said, personally, I think if someone you're trying to do business with requests stopping for breakfast, you just do it. Also, according to the waitress, he was just drinking coffee anyway, not really having a full-on second breakfast, which corroborates what we know of Lenny from the family. Investigators themselves were unsure if the diner patron was truly Lenny or a case of mistaken identity. Aside from this unconfirmed report, no one else recalled seeing Lenny on the day of his disappearance. As soon as Lenny went missing, a search was launched by local authorities and the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Investigators checked the Derrickson property and discovered that Lenny never arrived at the barn where his horses were kept on the day he disappeared. An exhaustive investigation in the following days and weeks turned up no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, and no body. Police had little to go on besides the account from Jared and the description of the unknown man who had come looking for a horse. This stranger immediately became the central focus of the investigation, since he was the last person seen with Lenny. A composite sketch of the man was developed based on descriptions from Jared and the diner waitress. This detailed him as a white male around 6 feet 2 inches and 210 pounds, with a full reddish-brown beard and a black cap with a No Fear logo. He has never been located or questioned, remaining simply a person of interest rather than an official suspect. 6 months after Lenny's disappearance, in September 1998, an unexpected phone call provided a tantalizing yet frustrating lead. An anonymous man called police from a bar in Amarillo, Texas, claiming that Lenny Derrickson was there in the bar with him. The caller described the person he believed was Lenny in detail. Making matters even stranger, this person was allegedly saying that he knew Lenny Derrickson personally. He refused to give his own name, but said he would wait at the bar for police to arrive. Officers rushed to the remote Amarillo bar, but by the time they got there, both the tipster and the man he had identified as Lenny were gone. The next day, a bartender corroborated parts of the story, remembering the enthusiastic caller and his claims that it was Lenny at the bar. Investigators found no reason to disbelieve the witness account, especially given the bartender's supporting narrative. Despite this encouraging lead, it too reached a dead end, and neither Lenny nor the anonymous caller could ever be found for verification. Law enforcement continued to track other leads and tips in the following years, but each one fizzled out. Over the years, several theories have emerged about what might have happened to Lenny Derrickson. One theory is that Lenny left of his own accord to start a new life. Investigators noted that Lenny had recently been through a painful divorce and was struggling financially with his dairy farm amid declining milk prices. Under the weight of personal and financial problems, it's speculated he might have seen an opportunity to escape. In fact, some law enforcement officials considered the possibility that Lenny left on his own and might have found work as a ranch hand somewhere far from home. Importantly, Lenny was devoted to his 16-year-old son Jared, and Jared has expressed significant doubt that he would have just left him behind. In my view, the personal factor related to his son casts significant doubt on the voluntary disappearance theory. The more ominous theory is that Lenny met with foul play at the hands of the unidentified man or someone associated with him. This theory posits that the stranger lured Lenny away under false pretenses, the story about wanting to buy a horse, and then harmed him. Several details support suspicions of foul play. For one, Lenny had not advertised any horse for sale, and the stranger's inquiry about a horse was completely unexpected. Investigators found it troubling that the visitor even knew to show up at the Derrickson farm, which was in a remote area not easy to find without directions. This suggests that Lenny's appearance as a target might not have been random, and that the man could have known Lenny or learned about him through someone else. If the diner sighting was accurate, the casual public meeting could indicate the stranger was trying to gain Lenny's trust before leading him to a more isolated location. That said, ultimately there is no evidence whatsoever, at least that's publicly accessible, that Lenny met with any sort of foul play. And I say publicly accessible here for a reason, because I've seen speculation online that the police asked to search the property of a suspect, but that the suspect refused to let them search. That said, these were comments made on online forums which I can't substantiate, and they may just be pure rumor mill gossip. One less prominent but still plausible theory, especially taking into account the Amarillo evidence, is the possibility of a dissociative fugue. Lenny had gone through a difficult divorce and was facing significant financial difficulties, and as such he may have left and adopted a new identity. That said, usually these states come to an end in weeks or months, and again Lenny had a son he was very close to, so I can't imagine him not at least contacting Jared if this was the case. The final prominent theory is that Lenny and the unknown man may have gotten involved in an accident on some rural road. Under this theory, the vehicle went off into a body of water and has never been found. And there's precedent for this. In this series, we've covered a few cases where a vehicle was discovered decades later, submerged in a local lake or deep river. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, with a reminder to hit that subscribe button and share this video with 2 people you know. Sharing my videos with your friends and family and on your socials is the best way you can help my channel grow, and the best part is it's entirely free. On December 8, 2010, a hunter discovered a human skull in a wooded area about 30 yards off Pecan Valley Road near Highway 12 in Nashville, Tennessee. No other skeletal remains were found despite a search of the area, and the skull was sent to the medical examiner's office. Because only the skull was recovered, the cause of death could not be determined from the remains. With no immediate identification, the unknown man was referred to as the Pecan Valley John Doe in case records. Traditional forensic efforts initially failed to identify the skull, with few details being publicly released at that point. In 2023, the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department partnered with Othram to apply advanced DNA testing and forensic genetic genealogy to the case. Othram scientists developed a comprehensive DNA profile from the degraded remains and conducted a genealogical search, which pointed investigators toward potential relatives. Over 14 years after the skull's discovery, authorities announced that the remains had been identified through DNA as Marcus Rutledge. Marcus Rutledge was a Tennessee State University student who disappeared under puzzling circumstances in the summer of 1998. And keep that student status in mind for a moment, because we'll be coming back to it shortly. He was last heard from on June 8, 1998, when he spoke with his girlfriend by phone around 1:30 p.m. Later that evening, she could not reach him and reported him missing after he failed to show up as expected. When family and friends checked Marcus's apartment, they found his dog locked in a bathroom and indications that Marcus had left in the middle of daily routines. His car, a 1995 Plymouth Neon with Michigan plates, was also missing from his residence. About 3 weeks later, on June 30th, 1998, Marcus's car was located parked at the Riverwood apartment complex on Cabot Drive in West Nashville. The vehicle yielded few clues. There were no signs of a struggle or blood in the car that could indicate what happened. Investigators did find a weapon inside the car, which was believed to possibly belong to Marcus. Family members were unaware he owned a weapon and found it unlikely that he would, given his personality and demeanor. But oftentimes people change, and they hide certain elements of their lifestyles from their family. However, his ex-girlfriend noted she wasn't surprised because Marcus had allegedly had, quote, run-ins and altercations with people in the months before he vanished. Despite searches and fairly significant local media coverage at the time, no trace of Marcus was found, and the case went cold. From the outset, Metro Nashville Police officially considered his disappearance a likely slaying, and this suspicion has only strengthened now that his remains have been found. In 2020, a cold case detective re-examined Marcus's case and uncovered secrets that Marcus had kept from his family, which provided context for possible motives. Investigators learned that Marcus was no longer actively enrolled in college at the time he disappeared. Further, he had been involved in selling small amounts of street cabbage and potentially other substances to help make ends meet. Personally, I wonder how these issues weren't caught in the initial investigation. It should have been easy to confirm that he had essentially dropped out of school, for instance. According to one of the lead detectives, Marcus had experienced confrontations in the months prior to vanishing, and police believe his sinister side hustle led to his disappearance. Another development that fueled speculation was the slaying of Marcus's best friend and former roommate Ethan Gibbs about 8 months after Marcus vanished. In February 1999, Gibbs was ended at his home by an unknown assailant. This shocking event led detectives at the time to consider a potential connection between Marcus's disappearance and Ethan's slaying, since the cabbage sales were a joint venture between the men. However, upon comparison of the two cases, investigators found no clear evidence linking the incidents. A suspect was charged in Gibbs's case, but the charges were later dropped, and that event remains unsolved. While Marcus Rutledge's identity has now been conclusively established, many questions about his death remain unanswered. The case is now being treated as an open slaying investigation, and the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department's cold case unit continues to pursue leads. Crucial details, such as the exact manner and time of his death, are still unknown, largely because only partial remains were recovered and no cause of death could be determined. While the identification of the Pecan Valley John Doe gave some closure to the family, the greater mystery now needs to be resolved. Who ended Marcus, and why? For 2 centuries, residents and visitors in Florida have exchanged stories of a mysterious ape-like creature lurking in the state's swamplands. Dubbed the skunk ape for its famously foul odor, this creature is often described as the Sunshine State's answer to Bigfoot. Witnesses claim the bipedal beast stands anywhere from 5 to 8 feet tall, covered in shaggy hair, and exudes an unbearable stench likened to rotten eggs or worse. Tales of wild man-apes in Florida stretch back to the early 19th century. As early as 1818, local newspapers in the Florida Panhandle reported encounters with a prowling man-sized monkey said to raid food stores and stalk fishermen near the town of Apalachicola. Some enthusiasts have even attempted to link the creature to Seminole legends of a foul-smelling creature called the Esti Kapakaki, which is translated as hairy giant. Scattered reports of an ape-like being continued into the early 20th century. For example, there's a 1940s account which tells of a tall man-like creature covered in hair leaping onto a truck's running board in Suwannee County. These early stories, as well as indigenous folklore, have set the stage for what would arguably become Florida's most famous cryptid. The skunk ape legend truly gained traction from the mid-20th century onwards. Eyewitness stories picked up significantly from the 1950s through the 1970s, coinciding with increased development of Florida's wilderness areas. During this era, sightings of a large, smelly ape man in the Everglades and surrounding regions became so common that they garnered widespread newspaper coverage. It was around this time that the colorful moniker skunk ape entered popular use, thanks to reports describing the creature's pungent odor and skunk-like stench. By the early 1970s, multiple witnesses in South Florida were alleging that the creature had invaded rural homes, chased hikers, and even eaten livestock. The wave of sightings was taken quite seriously by some. In 1977, Florida State Representative Paul Nuckols went so far as to propose a law to protect the creature from harm. The bill sought to criminalize the capturing or harming of any anthropoid or humanoid animal in Florida. Although this so-called skunk ape bill ultimately failed to pass, its introduction underscored how deeply the legend had permeated Florida's imagination by the late 1970s. Notably, Nuckols faced a great deal of criticism for the bill. However, he wasn't necessarily a believer in the creature. Rather, he just wanted a provision in place to stop skunk ape hunters from blasting one down or imprisoning one, should they exist. Throughout the years, a number of skunk ape encounters have stood out for their notoriety. In one incident in the early 1970s, 2 sheriff's deputies in Palm Beach County reported that an ape-like creature stalked them through an orange grove at night. The officers fired their weapons at it, and later found a trail of large footprints along with coarse hair caught on a barbed wire fence. Around the same period, a rash of encounters in counties near the Everglades made headlines when locals described a 5 to 7 foot tall, red-haired ape. This hominid was said to wander onto porches and even allegedly slaughtered farm animals and pets. Gangs of concerned citizens formed to hunt down the beast, and a patrol officer claimed to have struck it with his vehicle, yet no corpse or definitive evidence ever turned up. In 1997, a fire chief named Vince Doer was driving through Big Cypress National Preserve when, by his account, a shaggy, oversized figure darted across the road. Doer managed to snap a quick photograph of the tall, hairy creature before it vanished into the swamp. In the 2 weeks after his sighting, more than 50 people came forward, claiming to have seen a similar ape-like being in the area. Just a few years later came one of the most iconic and controversial pieces of skunk ape lore, the Myakka skunk ape photographs. In late 2000, the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office received an anonymous letter from a woman who enclosed startling photos of an ape-like creature partially obscured by palmetto fronds. The letter's author, who never revealed her identity, wrote that the, quote, orangutan had been stealing apples from her backyard, and she worried it might cause a car accident if not caught. The grainy flash photographs showed a large, hairy animal with reflective eyes and prominent fangs, leading many to speculate that this was the elusive skunk ape caught on film. Skeptics, however, noted that without a known photographer or original negatives, the Myakka pictures could easily be a hoax. To this day, the Myakka ape photos remain hotly debated, with some claiming they've been fully debunked, and others believing they depict a real live skunk ape. Numerous theories exist with respect to Florida's answer to the Sasquatch. Believers in the skunk ape contend that these sightings are not simply mistakes or hoaxes, but evidence of an unknown species residing in the remote swamps of the southeast. In the view of many cryptozoologists, the creature is essentially a regional cousin of Bigfoot, a smaller, swamp-dwelling hominid that has adapted to Florida's wetland environment. They point out that Florida's reports share similarities with Sasquatch legends elsewhere, noting that it's also a large bipedal primate that hides effectively from humans. Enthusiasts argue that with so many eyewitness accounts, it's plausible a real, elusive ape could be out there, as yet undocumented by science. Scientists and skeptics, on the other hand, propose more conventional explanations for the skunk ape legend. The simplest theory is misidentification, that purported skunk apes are in fact known animals, seen under unusual circumstances. Florida is home to black bears which can occasionally walk upright for short stints, potentially resembling a hulking ape from a distance. Others have suggested that passing glances at giant feral wild hogs could account for skunk ape sightings. Under this theory, giant feral hogs can represent a gorilla-like creature running or walking on its knuckles. Perhaps the most interesting skeptical theory on the skunk ape isn't that it doesn't exist, but that it's actually an escaped great ape, such as an orangutan. Personally, I find this idea the most interesting, though perhaps that's because I associate Florida with people owning exotic animals in private zoos and collections. The death of Christine da Serra, a young Filipina flight attendant, continues to be a subject of public intrigue and controversy. She was found dead on the morning of January 1st, 2021, at the City Garden Grand Hotel in Makati in the Philippines. The picture you're looking at right now was captured from the hotel security cameras in the hours before her passing. Her case has sparked heated debates over the investigation's direction, the handling of forensic evidence, and the conflicting narratives regarding her cause of death. Christine was 23 years old when she checked into the City Garden Grand Hotel on New Year's Eve 2020. She had asked her mother for permission to join a celebration with her co-workers, a decision that would soon turn tragic. After spending several hours at the hotel, Christine was taken to Makati Medical Center early on January 1st, 2021, where she was declared dead on arrival. Surveillance footage captured moments from her final hours. showing her in the company of several friends and acquaintances in the hotel lobby and corridors. Shortly after noon, her body was discovered in the bathtub of room 2207 with noticeable bruises and signs of possible physical abuse. Initial police reports described the case as an SA slaying, leading to charges against 11 men who were present at the hotel party. According to early statements, there were strong indications that Christine had been assaulted, including reports of bruises, lacerations, and biological material recovered. However, the subsequent autopsy, conducted by Police Major Michael Nick Sarmiento, revealed that Christine DeSera died from a ruptured aortic aneurysm, a natural cause of death. The autopsy noted lacerations on her thighs, contusions on her knees, and scratches, which complicated the picture. These physical findings raised questions about whether the injuries resulted from an altercation or were incidental to her underlying condition. The conflicting evidence in the initial autopsy and the family's own doubts spurred a second autopsy, the details of which remain confidential. The case quickly evolved into a battle of competing narratives. On one side, the Philippine National Police maintained that Christine's death was natural, citing the autopsy report that pointed to an aortic aneurysm as the cause of death. On the other side, the family and several critics argued that the physical evidence pointed to possible foul play. Furthermore, the way in which the investigation was conducted has also drawn considerable criticism. The PNP's decision to initially label the case as solved after identifying a group of suspects, who were later released due to insufficient evidence, has been widely denounced as premature. Critics argue that the rush to judgment not only tarnished the reputations of the individuals involved, but also left unanswered questions regarding the proper handling of forensic evidence. In particular, the decision to embalm Christine's body before a comprehensive forensic examination has been heavily criticized. They note that this may have compromised the collection of crucial biological evidence. What actually happened to Christine still remains a mystery, with her haunting last image revealing little about what actually happened to her that fateful night. In 1989, 23-year-old Adam Hecht, the son of a Hollywood film producer, mysteriously vanished from Beverly Hills. He was last seen on June 7, 1989, driving away from his home in a rented car while his own vehicle was in the repair shop. Adam Hecht grew up in a wealthy Beverly Hills family and was basically Hollywood royalty. His father, Harold Hecht, was a highly acclaimed movie producer whose filmography itself has its own Wikipedia page. Adam, then in his early 20s, was working as a tennis instructor. In early 1989, Adam befriended a homeless man known as Tony and shocked his family by inviting Tony to live in his apartment. He became disillusioned with his pampered lifestyle, and under Tony's influence, he developed an interest in meditation and mysticism. Adam often spent nights among the homeless, much to the shock of his wealthy friends and family. By June 1989, however, Adam's loved ones were growing increasingly concerned. On June 7th, he drove off in a rental car and never came back. After several days with no contact, his family reported him missing to the Beverly Hills police. When Adam's brother checked the apartment, Tony was there alone and couldn't account for Adam's whereabouts. Police questioned Tony, but he insisted he knew nothing about what happened, simply insisting that Adam was nowhere to be found. A few weeks later, Adam's rental car was found abandoned on a Beverly Hills street. It had multiple parking tickets on the windshield and the keys still in the ignition. Inside were Adam's wallet, driver's license, cash, and credit cards, but no clue to his fate. No further trace of Adam has ever been found despite extensive searches. With no evidence of a crime, police could only treat the case as a missing person matter rather than a slaying. Adam's family, however, insisted he would never leave on purpose. His brother emphasized that vanishing without a word was completely out of character for him. With no leads to follow, the case eventually went cold, although it remains open pending any new information. Two main theories have emerged about what happened to Adam Hecht. One theory is that he left voluntarily to start a new life. Disillusioned with his privileged life, Adam may have deliberately vanished to live among the homeless or to pursue a spiritual path. His keen interest in meditation and his willingness to abandon a wallet full of cash lend credence to this idea. In fact, some have suggested that leaving his keys in the ignition and his wallet full to the brim represent a conscious symbol of leaving behind his life of easy material wealth. Even police acknowledge the possibility that Adam simply decided not to return. The other theory is that Adam met with foul play. His family suspects that Tony, or someone else, may have harmed him. Tony's odd behavior and a cryptic remark he made have fueled this suspicion. About a year after the disappearance, one of Adam's family members ran into Tony and asked if he knew anything. Tony replied that if the family member, quote, stayed on the streets long enough, he would find out what happened to Adam. Some interpreted this to mean that Adam was slain by one of the homeless people he went to live amongst. Others, however, believe that this is an indication that Adam was alive and well, but living on the streets, completely rejecting his privileged upbringing. It's really hard to say what happened to Adam, but given that he never returned or contacted his family again, I have to suspect foul play as the most likely cause. That said, this is speculation on my part, since there's no hard evidence to suggest that Adam met with a grisly fate. Alternatively, though I've never seen it discussed, it's always possible that he had a mental break or dissociative fugue and simply never returned. Well, I've wanted to talk about this case forever, and I'm finally doing it, but man, this one just messes me up, and you'll see why really quickly. On February 14th, 1975, a couple driving down a rural farm road in Plaquemines Parish in Louisiana discovered the body of a young man hanging from a tree. The victim appeared to be a white male teenager around 16 to 18 years old with brown hair and eyes. At the base of the tree, investigators found a sealed glass jar containing a lengthy note addressed to Mom and Dad. In this letter, the teen expressed deep gratitude to his parents for giving him excellent advantages and privileges. However, he confessed to feeling like a false and empty vessel who never developed into a real person. He described a lifelong profound depression and a sense of detachment from life. The note even cited sociologist Emile Durkheim's writings on ending oneself, reflecting the boy's intellectual bent. In a poignant postscript, he implored authorities not to investigate his identity, stating that chasing his name would only shatter his parents' peace. To quote the teenager, "Do not deprive them of the hope that their missing son will return. Simply cremate me as John Doe." This extremely unusual request set the tone for the mystery to come. No identification was found with the body. Only a comb and a laundry marker in his clothing were recovered. Investigators in 1975 made extensive efforts to learn his name. They took the boy's fingerprints and circulated them to police nationwide, but no match turned up. The case received national media coverage, and over 300 parents of missing sons contacted the Plaquemines Parish Sheriff's Office or came to view the body. Yet after a 4-month campaign failed to identify him, the police ended up closing their file. Tragically, no official case files remain today, and the young man was ultimately interred in an unmarked grave in Gretna, Louisiana. Modern forensic efforts have been hampered by the lack of dental records or DNA. Further, because he was buried in an unmarked grave, and the case file was lost, no one is entirely certain where he was buried. That said, even if the case file hadn't been lost, it's unlikely that it would have recorded the exact location of his burial. The circumstances and the eloquent note have prompted many theories about what led this young person to take such a permanent action. Some have speculated that he might have been consumed by guilt for what he perceived as a serious wrongdoing, essentially punishing himself. Others believe he could have been struggling with his identity in an unaccepting era, contributing to his despair. Beyond motive, a major question is who this young man was. Because no local missing person matched his description, some internet sleuths have looked farther afield. One popular theory is that this John Doe might have been Bayard William Cousins, a 22-year-old from Virginia. Cousins disappeared in early February 1975 after leaving his family a note saying not to worry about him. Cousins was tall and slender with very dark brown hair and an interest in philosophy, details strikingly similar to the Plaquemines victim. However, Cousins wore glasses. None were found with the John Doe, and he was fairly substantially older than the estimated age of the John Doe. The difference between the lowest estimate for the John Doe and Cousins' actual age is 6 years, but the years between 16 and 22 are extremely significant. Further, Cousins had a very distinctive cross-shaped scar on one of his fingers, which wasn't noted by the police. Further yet, because the case file was lost, it may be the case that Cousins was already ruled out by the initial investigators. After all, they did interview approximately 300 parents, and given that Bayard went missing contemporaneously with the Doe finding, his parents may have been amongst the 300. While information obviously didn't travel to the same degree then as it does now, this story made national news. I imagine parents with a recently missing child would have been glued to the news as much as was possible in 1975, though this is admittedly speculation. Proponents of this theory suggest Bayard may have traveled over 1,000 miles to Louisiana to end himself anonymously. This lines up with the Doe's wish to spare his parents the pain of discovering his body, along with keeping their false hope of a positive resolution alive. This idea, while intriguing, remains unconfirmed, and as with investigations by internet sleuths, they work with even more incomplete data sets than the authorities do. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a reminder to hit that notification bell and share this video with 2 people you know. Sharing my videos with your friends and family and on your socials is the best way you can help my channel grow, and the best part is, it's entirely free. In October 1980, 47-year-old Cynthia Jabour vanished in Las Vegas. Over the ensuing years, her case was linked to several other missing persons and culminated in a landmark slaying conviction despite no body being found. Cynthia Jabour was last seen around 10:30 p.m. on October 5th, 1980, in the lobby of her boyfriend's Las Vegas condominium. She had told friends she intended to end her relationship with him that night due to his jealous and possessive behavior. When Jabour failed to return home, friends checked her apartment 2 days later and found no trace of her. No belongings were missing, and soon after, Jabour's car turned up abandoned in the parking lot of Caesars Palace Hotel. She had also left behind about $47,000 in investments that she presumably wouldn't have abandoned voluntarily. From the outset, these signs pointed to foul play rather than a voluntary disappearance. Police quickly focused on Jabour's boyfriend, Robert Weeks, as the prime suspect. When questioned, Weeks claimed she had canceled their dinner plans and he had no idea where she went. Investigators were immediately skeptical of his story. Weeks initially agreed to a lie detector test, then abruptly backed out, saying he had to leave town. Within a month of Jabour's disappearance, Weeks fled the country for Mexico and then Chile. His flight greatly heightened suspicion of his involvement. With their main suspect gone and no physical evidence, the case went cold for years, though Weeks remained the focus of investigators' suspicions. Notably, 3 years later, Weeks re-entered the States using a Libyan passport issued in the name of Robert Smith. Somehow this didn't set off any alarm bells, and he was able to resettle and resume his life in the States, living as the Libyan national Robert Smith. Somehow, this may be the most absurd line I've written in the entire time I've been a YouTuber. And to give some context, I've written about the giant shrimp in the laundry room urban legend, so that's saying something. A major break came in 1986 when another woman in Weeks's life vanished in a similar manner. On April 5th, 1986, one of Weeks's girlfriends, Carol Ann Riley, disappeared in San Diego on the night she intended to break up with him. Her car was found abandoned at a hotel, mirroring Jabour's case. This prompted detectives to dig into Weeks's past, and they discovered a disturbing pattern that went beyond Cynthia Jabour. Robert's ex-wife Patricia vanished in Las Vegas in April 1968, shortly after their divorce. Her car was found abandoned, and Weeks claimed she had a nervous breakdown and fled. Unsurprisingly, she was never seen or heard from again. Weeks's business associate Jim Shaw went missing in May 1971 after a heated argument with him. Shaw's car was later found abandoned, and there were significant signs of violence. With all four cases spanning 18 years linked to Robert Weeks, investigators concluded they were dealing with a single perpetrator. In 1987, the investigation received nationwide exposure when the case was profiled on Unsolved Mysteries. In May 1987, a viewer tip led police to Tucson, Arizona, where Weeks was living under an alias. He was promptly arrested on an unrelated fraud charge, which allowed authorities to hold him while they built their big case. Weeks was then extradited to Nevada, and soon after he was indicted for the slaying of Cynthia Jabour and his ex-wife. He was suspected in the Riley and Shaw cases as well, though prosecutors found that there was insufficient evidence to charge him. Robert Weeks went on trial in Las Vegas in April 1988. Prosecutors argued that Weeks was a possessive, violent man who would resort to anything to prevent the women in his life from leaving. Witnesses testified about his jealousy and abusive behavior, emphasizing that neither Cynthia nor Patricia would have left their lives behind voluntarily. One of the most incriminating pieces of evidence was Weeks's personal diary. In one entry, he wrote that Cynthia had, quote, humiliated him beyond belief, and vowed to, quote, even the score. And yeah, it's always nice when the villain in the story decides to snitch on themselves, isn't it? Somewhat controversially, the evidence related to Carol Riley and Jim Shaw was also allowed to be entered into evidence, despite him not being charged in relation to those disappearances. Weeks was found guilty of first-degree slayings in both Cynthia's and Patricia's cases in April 1988. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Notably, it was the first time in Nevada history that a conviction such as this was achieved without a victim's body as evidence. Even after his conviction, Robert Weeks never revealed what became of Cynthia Jabour or the other missing individuals. None of the four victims' remains have ever been recovered, and investigators suspect that Weeks hid the bodies in remote desert mine shafts, which would explain the lack of physical evidence. Weeks took the secret of his victims' deaths to the grave with him, denying the families that ultimate closure they so desperately wanted. In late April 1981, a group of young men made a grim discovery along a rural road in Newton Township near Troy, Ohio. They found the body of a young woman lying in a ditch, clad in jeans, a turtleneck sweater, and a distinctive tasseled buckskin poncho. Notably, the victim was barefoot and had no identification on her, making immediate identification impossible. Police were called to the scene, and an investigation into the young woman's death began right away. An autopsy later revealed that the woman had been brutally slain. She had suffered severe blunt force trauma to her head and neck, and then was strangled, likely about 2 days before her body was found. The medical examiner also noted a laceration on her liver, consistent with a violent assault. Importantly, and surprisingly to initial investigators, There were no signs of any illicit assault on the victim. The young woman appeared to be in her late teens or early 20s, with reddish-brown hair braided into pigtails. Further, she had very well cared for teeth, indicating that she likely had a good upbringing. These details painted a perplexing picture for investigators. The victim, clearly slain, didn't fit the profile of a transient person living on the streets, yet no one knew who she was. With no name to call her, investigators and the media gave the unidentified victim a nickname based on her clothing. The fringed suede poncho she wore led to her being dubbed the Buckskin Girl, and she became one of the most famous Jane Doe cases in the country. From the outset, Ohio authorities worked diligently to identify the victim. Because the body was found relatively soon after death, police were able to take her fingerprints and dental records for comparison. However, in 1981, there were limited computer databases, and her prints matched no criminal records, while her dental information didn't match any known missing persons reports. Investigators also released a composite sketch of the young woman's face to newspapers and TV stations in hopes that someone would recognize her. These efforts generated around 200 tips in the weeks after the slaying, but unfortunately none of them panned out. As time went on, the case grew cold, but not forgotten. The authorities preserved all the evidence from the crime scene in good condition. This included the victim's clothing and samples of her blood, with the hope that future advances might break the case. In 2001, they were able to generate a DNA profile of the victim from the preserved blood sample. In 2008, the Buckskin Girl was entered into the newly created National Missing and Unidentified Persons System database, one of the first cases to be included there. In 2016, investigators performed isotope analysis on the victim's hair and a pollen analysis on her clothing, hoping to learn where she had been before her death. These tests suggested intriguing details. Buckskin Girl had likely spent a significant amount of time in the southwestern United States shortly before she died. Conversely, pollen on her shirt and inner clothing pointed to extended time in the northeastern US or Canada during the year before her death. This lined up with the theory that she was a transient or hitchhiker who traveled long distances. The victim's clean, bare feet at the crime scene also supported the idea that she hadn't walked to the dump site herself. Police believed she was slain elsewhere, perhaps indoors or in a vehicle, and her body was left beside the Ohio road not long after her death. The major breakthrough in the Buckskin Girl case finally came nearly 37 years after the act. By 2018, a new forensic method, genetic genealogy, had emerged, allowing investigators to identify victims or suspects by matching DNA to distant relatives through genealogical databases. Miami County authorities partnered with a volunteer organization, the DNA Doe Project, to apply this technique. Using the blood sample from 1981, forensic scientists obtained a high-quality DNA profile of the victim and uploaded it to a public genealogy database. In March 2018, within only a few hours of analysis, genealogists found a potential family connection. In early April 2018, the Miami Valley Regional Crime Laboratory confirmed the identification by obtaining DNA from a relative of the missing woman and comparing it to the victim. In a press conference on April 11, 2018, authorities announced that the Buckskin Girl had been identified as Marcia King, a 21-year-old woman from Arkansas. Marcia King had last been seen by her family in 1980, when she left home in Little Rock and traveled out of state. Because she was an adult and no one suspected she was in danger, her family never filed an official missing persons report. Marcia King's identification was groundbreaking for law enforcement. She was one of the first unidentified victims to be identified through forensic genetic genealogy, a technique that would soon become famous for helping solve other cold cases. Marcia's family, who had quietly hoped for her return for years, now had closure about her fate, though it was a sad confirmation of her death. In Ohio, the Jane Doe headstone at her grave was replaced with a new marker bearing Marcia's name, and a memorial service was held where local residents and officers paid their respects. The identification also renewed energy in the investigation, since knowing Marcia's identity gave detectives new leads about where she had been and who she associated with. Even with Marcia King's identity known, the question of who ended her remains unanswered. Before she was identified, investigators considered that she might have been a teenage runaway or a hitchhiker traveling across states. Indeed, after her identification, it became clear Marcia often hitchhiked and had ties to multiple cities like Pittsburgh and Louisville during her travels. Her well-kept appearance, however, indicated she wasn't living homeless, and that she likely had places to stay or people helping her along the way. It's been speculated that she may have been living out of a vehicle, such as a van, when she met her untimely end. Investigators and internet sleuths have speculated that she may have been slain by an as-yet unknown boyfriend or male traveling partner. Others speculate that she may have been in a traveling cult, a theory which has some evidence for it, and which I'll come back to shortly. Given the era and Marcia's red hair, detectives examined possible links to known serial perpetrators. In 1985, her case was briefly considered as possibly related to the so-called redhead slayings, a series of violent acts against red-haired young women across the United States. However, this connection was eventually ruled out as evidence recovered from the scenes of those crimes and other case specifics didn't match. Others wondered if Marcia might have been an early victim of an unidentified serial wrongdoer, nicknamed Dr. No, who was known for targeting women along Ohio highways in the 1980s. Despite these theories, no known suspect has ever been arrested or charged in Marcia King's slaying. However, there have been positive movements in the investigation, and since her identification, investigators have pieced together some of her final movements. Marcia was reportedly seen in early April 1981 in Louisville, Kentucky, and possibly was involved with a traveling religious group or cult around the time of her death. At present, the authorities still believe that the most likely person responsible for Marcia King's slaying is an as-yet identified boyfriend. Paula Abdul is an American singer, choreographer, and television personality who rose to fame in the late 1980s with a string of pop hits. In 1991, she began her worldwide Under My Spell tour that lasted until the end of 1992. Years later, she made a startling claim. In 1992, she survived a plane crash during that tour, which left her seriously injured and forced her off stage for an extended period. Abdul has described undergoing 15 spinal surgeries as a result of the crash, and said the incident derailed her career for 7 years. Paula Abdul has publicly recounted the plane crash story on multiple occasions, providing vivid details of the incident and its aftermath. According to her earliest accounts, the crash occurred in 1992 while she was traveling between concert stops on a small private plane. She stated, quote, "It all happened when I boarded a 7-seater plane, and an hour into the flight, one of the engines blew up and the right wing caught fire, and everything went black." The next thing she remembered, she claimed, was waking up in a hospital. "I woke up in the hospital only to find that I had crushed my cervical spine, leaving me partially paralyzed." Abdul says the crash left her with severe injuries that required extensive medical intervention. During her recovery, she experienced chronic pain and limited mobility. The singer has often emphasized how the incident abruptly halted her career momentum. She has indicated that because of the crash and the ensuing health struggles, she had to step away from performing for several years. In fact, Abdul often quantifies the hiatus at about 7 years of downtime in her career before she could return to work. This would roughly correspond to the period from the early 1990s until the early 2000s, just before her reemergence in the public eye as a judge on American Idol. While Abdul's story is compelling, numerous inconsistencies and gaps in evidence have led observers to question its authenticity. There are some significant key issues that cast doubt on her plane crash claim, according to skeptics. Investigations into the claim have turned up no official record of any plane crash in 1992 or 1993, matching Paula Abdul's description. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, which logs all aviation accidents, has no record of a crash involving Abdul. Nor does it have any record of a small plane incident on the dates and locations she has mentioned. Additionally, no contemporaneous news reports or media coverage can be found documenting such an event, even though a celebrity plane crash would be expected to make headlines. Further skeptics argue that even if the crash could have been kept off official records, the attendance of a major celebrity at a hospital for a plane crash would have led to leaks to the press. According to skeptics, this absence of evidence is an extremely significant red flag. Another issue arises from potentially inconsistent claims about the crash that she has made over the years. Abdul's own statements about when the crash happened have varied over time, leading to confusion about the timeline. In some interviews, she has referred to the crash occurring in 1992 during the Under My Spell tour, while in others she's implied it happened in 1993 after the tour's end. This is problematic because Abdul's world tour officially concluded in 1992, and she wasn't touring in 1993. Again, this is a problem according to skeptics because from her earliest accounts, the alleged plane trip took place while she was on tour. For example, Abdul once said the accident happened on her birthday in June 1993, even though by that time her tour had long ended. Given the nature of the claim, one would expect other people to have been involved and to remember the event. Abdul described being on a 7-seater plane. Presumably there was a pilot and possibly co-pilot and other passengers or crew present. To date, no pilot or passenger has ever come forward publicly to corroborate Abdul's story. There are no known eyewitness accounts from airport personnel, emergency responders, or crew that support the occurrence of a fiery emergency landing or crash involving Abdul. A plane making an emergency crash landing with a pop star on board would likely have been documented or remembered by others, yet no such testimonies exist in the public record. Another potential contradiction lies in Abdul's explanations for her chronic injuries. In some narratives, Abdul has mentioned 2 separate accidents in the early 1990s, the plane crash and a 1992 car accident, as both contributing to her health issues. According to a 2019 interview in Parade magazine, quote, Abdul experienced 2 accidents, a 1992 car crash that left her with neck injuries, and a 1993 plane crash that left her partially paralyzed. This raises questions about whether the plane crash alone was responsible for her medical problems, or if the story evolved from a combination of events. According to skeptics, the overlap of a serious car wreck in the same time frame might explain Abdul's injuries, casting doubt on the need for a separate plane crash incident at all. It's unclear why Abdul sometimes highlights one incident versus the other, and the inconsistency in her accounts of what caused her spinal damage has fueled skepticism. To skeptics, these contradictions all suggest that Abdul's plane crash story doesn't add up neatly. Supporters or sympathetic observers of Paula Abdul argue that there are reasons aside from intentional deceit that could explain the discrepancies in her plane crash story. Surviving a catastrophic event, or even believing one has, can be traumatic, and the physical and mental trauma can affect memory. Another significant possibility is that there was a real in-flight emergency or hard landing that Abdul experienced, but that it wasn't officially classified as a crash. For instance, The plane's pilot might have managed to make an emergency landing at a small airfield or open area without notifying federal authorities. Supporters argue that since there were no fatalities, the incident could have been handled privately, without involving the authorities or insurance companies. In such a scenario, the event might not appear in records if it wasn't reported as an accident. Abdul could be describing this frightening close call as a crash in layman's terms. Some have speculated that perhaps the plane did encounter severe mechanical trouble, like an engine fire, as she said. They suggest the pilot had to land abruptly, giving Abdul the impression of having survived a crash, even if the official criteria weren't met. Notably, people can suffer from significant injuries in very hard landings, which may explain why she sustained severe injuries to her neck and back. This would still be a terrifying incident that caused lifelong physical trauma, just not one that left the kind of public trace we'd expect. Further, supporters point out that she undoubtedly suffers from chronic pain issues, which did derail her career at its height. For now, the truth of the matter remains unknown, with both skeptics and supporters raising interesting points in favor of their respective positions. And yes, this is one case I'd like to know your opinions on in the comments, so let me know which side you support in the comments below. To tip my hand slightly, I tend to lean towards the hard landing theory, but I'm no celebrity gossip expert. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a reminder to hit that notification bell and share this video with 2 people you know. Sharing my videos with your friends and family and on your socials is the best way you can help my channel grow, and the best part is, it's entirely free. The Iron Maiden is one of the most infamous torture devices linked with the medieval period. It's typically described as a man-sized iron cabinet or coffin lined with sharp spikes on the inside, into which a victim would be placed. Once the doors of the sarcophagus-like device closed, the spikes would pierce the victim's body in multiple places, causing severe pain and a slow death by bleeding. This gruesome image of medieval cruelty has appeared in countless books, museums, and even horror films. However, the historical reality of the Iron Maiden is far more complicated, and many scholars question whether such a device was ever actually used in the Middle Ages at all. Curiously, there are no known medieval records that describe an Iron Maiden device in use. The concept of locking a person in a spiked coffin seems to have pre-medieval origins in legend and literature. Historians have traced early accounts of similar devices in various cultures long before the Middle Ages. Early Christian writers like Tertullian and Augustine recount the torture of Roman general Marcus Atilius Regulus. In this story, Regulus was confined in a tight wooden box studded with sharp nails on all sides, so that he couldn't lean without being pierced. He ultimately died from being unable to sleep, rather than from the spikes directly. This tale, though ancient, contains the key elements of an Iron Maiden and may have inspired later imaginations. Another example appears in the Arab world in the 9th century. The Abbasid vizier Ibn al-Zayyat was said to have constructed a wooden chest lined with iron spikes to drop some seriously inhumane abuse on prisoners. Ironically, this cruel invention was reportedly used on Ibn al-Zayyat himself when he fell out of favor in 847, leading to his death inside his own spiked box. This suggests that the story of the spiked chest may have been added to the story later to enhance the moral tale of the story. These early anecdotes suggest that the concept of an Iron Maiden-like torture device has floated around for centuries. None of these, however, were called Iron Maiden, nor is there evidence that a dedicated iron cabinet with interior spikes was actually built in those times. Some historians also point to a medieval German device called the Schandmantel as a possible inspiration. The Schandmantel was essentially a barrel or coat made of wood or metal used to punish and publicly shame offenders, but it did not contain spikes. 19th century showmen or writers may have misinterpreted or embellished such artifacts by adding spikes in their descriptions or reconstructions. Despite the lack of medieval evidence, the Iron Maiden became firmly embedded in popular imagination as a quintessential medieval torture device. The turning point for this legend seems to have come in the late 18th century. In 1793, a German philosopher and antiquarian named Johann Philipp Siebenkees published an account of an execution supposedly carried out in Nuremberg in 1515. According to his story, a criminal met his fate inside an Iron Maiden, allegedly due to his participation in coin forging activities. However, modern historians have strong reasons to believe Siebenkees simply fabricated the story as a sensational anecdote. No earlier records corroborate the 1515 execution, and it appears Siebenkees' report was the first time anyone had described such a device being used in medieval Europe. Before I get the comments, I realize 1515 is the early modern period by most modern historiographical standards. That said, the late medieval period is generally agreed to have ended around 1500, so Siebenkees wasn't far off. In the early 1800s, several museums and private collections in Europe started displaying Iron Maiden contraptions, claiming they were relics of medieval torture chambers. The most famous example was the Iron Maiden of Nuremberg, which was exhibited as a genuine medieval instrument of pain. Sources indicate that the Nuremberg Iron Maiden was actually constructed around the turn of the 19th century, possibly around 1800 to 1802, specifically for display. It featured a cast iron exterior crafted in a pseudo-Gothic style, often with a female face or religious motifs, and interior spikes that would line up with a victim's vital organs. This artifact gained enormous notoriety and it toured exhibitions and world's fairs, horrifying and fascinating the public with the idea of medieval barbarity. In reality, it was a product of modern craftsmen and imagination, not a surviving medieval object. The original Nuremberg Iron Maiden was destroyed in 1944 when Allied bombing raids struck the city during World War II, but you can see the copy on your screen right now. Today, the consensus in scholarly circles is that the Iron Maiden's medieval existence is a myth. In other words, it was effectively written into history in the 18th and 19th centuries, not the Middle Ages. Some scholars have noted that there was a trend in the 19th century to cobble together various antiques into claimed medieval torture devices. This practice was part of a broader Victorian-era fascination with the dark reality preceding their time, and with the Middle Ages. Oh, and before I end this segment, I have to mention that there's an actual legitimate account of the Iron Maiden being used for its supposed intended purpose. But it's not a medieval usage, and in fact comes from the late 20th and early 21st century. We can all agree that Saddam Hussein was a bad guy, right? Well, let's just say that he was an absolute saint compared to his psychopathic son, Uday Hussein, a man who saw the Iron Maiden and thought, yeah, that sounds like good dinner entertainment. On December 13th, 2020, around 10:55 p.m., Jason Landry left his apartment in San Marcos, Texas, to drive to his parents' home near Houston. By 11:24 p.m., Landry had reached the town of Luling, where his phone data shows he stopped using the Waze app and opened Snapchat. And in case you're not aware, Waze is a navigation app, and Snapchat, for the two people out there who don't know, is basically just a messaging app with more selfies. Instead of staying on the main highway, he continued straight through town, onto a rural path known as Salt Flat Road. Sometime around midnight, investigators believe Landry's vehicle veered off the gravel road and crashed. In the early morning of December 14th, around 12:30 a.m., a passing volunteer firefighter discovered Landry's Nissan Altima wrecked along Salt Flat Road. The car's lights were still on and the keys were in the ignition, but Jason was nowhere to be found. His clothes, backpack, phone, and other personal belongings were strewn around the crash site, yet there was no sign of him in the area. One theory holds that Jason was injured or disoriented from the crash and wandered off on foot. The night was cold, and if he was in shock or under the influence, he may have become confused and removed his clothing, a behavior sometimes seen in cases of hypothermia. With only a tiny drop of blood found at the scene and no indication of a struggle, it appears he survived the wreck with minor injuries and left the vehicle on his own. In this scenario, Landry might have gotten lost in the darkness and ultimately succumbed to the elements. However, some have speculated that he may have been under the influence and fleeing from the crash site when he got lost. Another theory suggests that despite a lack of evidence of any major injuries, he could have suffered a traumatic brain injury in the accident. This could have caused him to act disoriented and out of character and leave the scene of the accident. Another theory suggests that someone else was involved in Jason's disappearance. Search dogs tracked Jason's scent from the crash site back toward Luling for about a quarter mile before the trail suddenly ended. This clue raises the possibility that he got a ride or was picked up by an unknown individual at that point. However, no direct evidence supports this scenario. Law enforcement launched an extensive search immediately after Jason's car was found. Caldwell County authorities and volunteer search teams scoured the area with tracking dogs, but found no trace of Landry beyond the belongings left at the crash site and the brief scent track. Investigators also analyzed the physical evidence. Analysis of the wreck indicated a single car accident with no sign of another vehicle involved. As of February 2025, Jason Landry remains missing, and his case continues to baffle investigators. The Honjo Masamune is often regarded as the ultimate samurai sword, a legendary blade forged by the master swordsmith Masamune in medieval Japan. For centuries it was treasured as a symbol of authority, representing the power of the Tokugawa regime during the Edo period. The sword was so esteemed that it was designated a national treasure of Japan in 1939. However, despite its celebrated status, the Honjo Masamune vanished in the aftermath of World War II, leaving behind a mystery that endures to this day. The story of the Honjo Masamune begins with its creator, Goro Masamune, who lived in the late 13th to early 14th century. Masamune is revered as Japan's greatest swordsmith, known for developing revolutionary forging techniques that produced blades of unparalleled quality. The Honjo Masamune itself gained its name and fame in the Sengoku, or Warring States period. In 1561, a samurai general named Honjo Shiganaga acquired the sword during a fierce battle. As the story goes, Shiganaga was attacked by an enemy wielding this Masamune blade. The sword struck Shiganaga's helmet and split it, though he somehow survived the blow unharmed. Shiganaga defeated his attacker and claimed the sword as one of the spoils of war, and thereafter the blade came to be known by his name, Honjo Masamune. Honjo Shiganaga eventually sold the prized sword to the Toyotomi clan. The Honjo Masamune passed through the hands of powerful figures in Japan. It was first owned by Toyotomi Hidetsugu, the nephew of the warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Hideyoshi eventually came to possess it himself, and from there it came into the possession of Tokugawa Ieyasu. Tokugawa Ieyasu founded the Tokugawa shogunate, and after he became shogun in 1603, the sword became a part of the Tokugawa family's treasures. For over 2.5 centuries of the Edo period, the sword was a ceremonial blade symbolizing the shogun's authority, handed down through generations of Tokugawa rulers. The tumult of World War II set the stage for the Honjo Masamune's disappearance. In 1945, Japan's surrender brought an Allied occupation government that mandated the disarmament of the population. All Japanese citizens, including former samurai aristocracy, were ordered to surrender all weapons, which also included priceless antique swords. The Honjo Masamune held by the Tokugawa family was not spared. In December 1945, its custodian Tokugawa Ieyasu complied with the order. He turned over the Honjo Masamune, along with several other priceless family swords, to the Majiro police station in Tokyo. The understanding was that these swords were to be kept safe and may eventually be returned to the family during the process of rebuilding Japan. In January 1946, the surrendered swords were handed over by the police to a U.S. officer from the Foreign Liquidation Commission. But there was just one problem. He identified himself by the traditional all-American name, Coldy Bymore. Now, unsurprisingly to any native English speaker, Coldy Bymore wasn't a name that corresponded to any real American serviceman. After that transfer, the trail went cold. The sword never appeared in any official records or collections again, effectively vanishing from history. The fate of the weapon has been the subject of much speculation. Over the decades, historians, sword enthusiasts, and treasure hunters have proposed several theories about what became of this legendary blade. One possibility is that the legendary weapon was inadvertently destroyed along with many other surrendered swords. During the occupation, many confiscated swords were dumped at sea or melted down. It's conceivable the Honjo Masamune was unknowingly destroyed along with those piles of blades. Under this theory, the American handlers failed to realize its significance, believing it was a mass-produced sword from the war. Personally, I have some doubts about this given the appearance of the Masamune swords, which are clearly of extremely high quality even to a non-expert. Another theory is that Coldy Bymore, whoever he actually was, realized the value of the Honjo Masamune and kept it as a personal war trophy. American servicemen were generally permitted to take swords home as war trophies. It's very plausible that the Honjo Masamune was kept by the officer who took it. If so, it may have been quietly passed down in that person's family, or otherwise changed hands in private after the war. That is to say, you could have Grandpa Coldy's Honjo Masamune hanging above your fireplace. Another theory is that Coldy Bymore was made up by someone in the Japanese police who knew the value of the sword. Under this theory, this individual knew that a Tokugawa descendant dropped off rare and valuable swords and fabricated a story about an American serviceman coming to grab it. Unfamiliar with American naming conventions, this individual thought up the absurd name Coldy Bymore and kept the sword for himself. Other theories consider that it may be held in a private collection, and the reason why it hasn't been returned is that it was purchased on the black market. Occasional claims and rumors have popped up. For example, excitement brewed in 2013 when a long-lost Masamune sword turned up at the Kyoto National Museum. However, it turned out to be a different blade, the Shimazu Masamune, which hadn't had a verified sighting since 1862.